May 31st, 1960, Tokyo. A company called Service Games of Japan was dissolved. Not a merger, not a rebrand, a shutdown. After years of allegations that followed it from one U.S. military base to another. 3 days later, its founders started 2 new companies instead. One of these companies would eventually take a shortened version of the old name for its own, Service Games, SEGA. Another empire, another case. Here's what really happened. In 1940, 3 men, Martin Bromley, Irving Bromberg, and James Humpert, formed a company in Honolulu to supply coin-operated machines to U.S. military bases. By the early 1950s, that business had become Service Games, and it had followed the U.S. military itself across the Pacific, into Japan, then further into the Far East, wherever American bases needed jukeboxes, slot machines, and amusement equipment. By the late 1950s, that success had drawn scrutiny. Service Games faced allegations of bribery, tax evasion, and improper business practices on military installations, serious enough that by 1959 and 1960, the company was banned from operating on U.S. bases in Japan and the Philippines. Some of it stuck, some of it didn't. A 1964 U.S. tax court proceeding would later find no fraud in at least one matter tied to Bromley and the company. But the damage to the business itself was already done. On May 31st, 1960, Service Games of Japan was formally dissolved. 3 days later, its founders didn't disappear. They just split into 2 new companies, and one of them was about to meet the man who would actually turn this into something worth remembering. On June 3rd, 1960, 2 new companies rose from Service Games' dissolution. Nihon Garaku Busan and Nihon Kikai Saizo. One built slot machines. The other distributed jukeboxes and coin-op equipment. In 1964, the 2 merged back into a single company under the Nihon Garaku Busan name. Meanwhile, an American Air Force veteran named David Rosen had been building something completely separate. In 1954, Rosen started a phone booth business in Japan under the name Photorama. By 1956 or 1957, he pivoted into importing American coin-operated amusement machine, a business that, at the time, barely existed in Japan at all. In 1965, Rosen Enterprises merged with Nihon Garaku Busan. The combined company took a new name, Sega Enterprises Limited. Sega, widely understood as a shortened form of Service Games, the company whose collapse 5 years earlier had made this merger possible in the first place. A band company, a photo booth salesman. 1 year later, together, they'd build the thing that actually made Sega's name mean something. In 1966, Sega released Periscope, an electromechanical submarine simulator game built under the direction of engineer Shikanosuke Ochi. Players looked through a periscope viewer and fired at ships crossing a miniature sea. It became a genuine sensation, both in Japan and internationally, and helped establish Sega as more than just an importer of other companies' machines. It's worth being honest about how unusual Periscope actually was for its time, and about who else was building something similar. Namco, under Masaya Nakamura, had its own Periscope-style game around the same period. Whether Sega's version was the definitive first is genuinely disputed among video game historians. What's not disputed is the result. Periscope became Sega's breakthrough, the machine that proved the company could build originals, not just import them. A company built from the wreckage of a banned military supplier had just built one of the biggest arcade hits in the world. What it did with that momentum over the next decade is a completely different story. David Rosen would spend the next 3 decades running Sega's American and international operations, a role that eventually connects directly to the console wars this series will cover in full later on. He passed away on December 25th, 2025, having remained connected to the company he helped build for nearly his entire life. Sega didn't begin with a garage, a genius, or a single founder's vision. It began with a banned military contractor, a dissolved company, and a photo booth salesman who happened to be in the right city at the right time. Everything Sega became afterward, the arcades, the consoles, Sonic himself, traces back to a shutdown nobody involved would have called a beginning. Another empire, another case. Here's what really happened.